and again, I think it depends where you sit, the way you see it. And obviously Washington interprets those things differently. But if I was sitting in Beijing, if I looked out and looked around, I would think, yeah, this gets pretty close to containment in terms of alliances that are being built around me. Just one comment on the media. It's true, yes, of course, much is English. I think one of the things that the propaganda authorities in Beijing need to kind of get to grips with is the kind of language and the kinds of approaches which might go down well in China don't go down so well in the English-speaking communities.
Yeah, these days, I mean, even the domestic message is international message, international message is domestic message. I think that, you know, we need a new narrative, absolutely, I think. But on the other hand, it is also true the West media sometimes they have a long ideological lens on China. So it's not a short term. I think we can hope improve on that. And but Tony, I read your recent last year, July 2020. There's a great paper you reportedly published, understanding CCP resilience, surveying Chinese public opinions through time, which you have constantly monitored China through 2003. And that's something I also caused the ideological differences, because China has always had a high authority somewhere for 5,000 years, always a highly centralized country and authority. Those big irrigation projects, those big country geographically needs a strong authority. And now, let alone governing 1.4 billion people, the largest in the world. So the CPC now, they lifted 800 million people out of poverty. They've been doing all the infrastructure transformation in China, and also anti-corruption and all the things. So I think that your survey has really quite well documented all those changes, and also the general masses acceptance of CPC. They deliver through their legitimacy, they earn their legitimacy by really constant responding to the economic needs, which is great. So maybe I think there's a little bit is that how we can really have a better message, have a better understanding of the world, rather than this kind of, as you said, wolf warrior behavior going on in both places, probably.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I think is worth saying with that. One thing our surveys found, which unfortunately we're not allowed to conduct anymore, is that contrary to what many people outside of China have thought, the groups that whose satisfaction has increased most were the poorer rural and the poorer urban communities, and those communities in the hinterland of China rather than the eastern area of China. Now, that's not to say that satisfaction didn't increase, say, in the east or with richer populations. But what it says to me is that the leadership in Beijing have understood that they have a problem with those who have not benefited so well from reform in the past, and that really since Hu Jintao and Jiabao, the investments in social infrastructure have actually been popular with many Chinese citizens, whether it's the restoration of the medical insurance scheme, whether it's the expansion of Dibao or other activities, that does seem to have enhanced satisfaction. So in a way that kind of dismisses one of the ideas, I think, that has been around, that maybe there's a social volcano of discontent related to developments in China. But I do think, as I said earlier, really Beijing's behavior is going to be decided by what happens in China. And I don't think anyone can doubt that the economic growth has been spectacular. People coming out of poverty has been extraordinary. I think we can argue what really led to that. Was it state activity? Was it simply letting Chinese entrepreneurial habits come to the fore? But the real challenges are, can China get to the next step of its development? I mean, it's been extraordinary. One can be critical about a whole range of things, and people are, and I am as well. But you also have to acknowledge that some of that progress has been extraordinary and unexpected. But the real challenges now that lie ahead of getting from being a sort of upper middle income to a real high income country, I think are quite considerable. And some of the institutions which have served China well in the past may not be so effective moving forward. And I think this again is something that's ignored in Washington, where it tends to be, if you like, a straight line projection. China's developed in this way, it'll keep developing. How do we deal with that? And what might the threat be coming from that? Personally, I think China is going to be much more absorbed over the next 5 to 10 years with dealing with these domestic challenges, which is also going to limit its capacity to extend its power externally.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. Well, I really admire you. I mean, you've been conducting this survey and research. I mean, since 2003, and you've been go to all those different areas of China. One of the very in-depth field studies with other professors too. I mean, very, very impressive. I do think though that because you frequently visit China, you were in charge of Harvard China executive training program. I mean, so these days, if people come to China, they realize. I mean, it's incredible now. Even people living in China has been surprised. But like now, China has a 1.3 billion people covered with basic Medicare, and 1 billion people with some basic social security package as well. And of course, 1 to 9 year compulsory education, 1 billion smartphone users, and so I think the livelihood of the people really has gone up enormously, and so that probably attributes to the government efforts, of course, with the market reform. So I would always say China is a hybrid, with 6-7% of private enterprise, and then you have another 10-15 multinational, another 10-15 SOE. That probably provide a right balance to push the economy. And also with the bigger government coordination with 1 5-year plan after another 5-year plan. And now I see what President Biden is doing. Basically, it's like a little bit bigger government now, more intervention, more coordination. So you're right. I think you observe this phenomenon in China, and I think that's where probably there are certain people in the West may be lacking of that. So I really hope there will be more professors, academics like you to conduct more this kind of types of research in China, which I think also China can learn a lot as well. I mean, of course, China still have a lot of challenges. I agree with you. There's a how can we sustain this kind of growth, and also President should just pledge the climate change objective. But China is 60% rely on the coal burning, and how we can reach carbon neutral by 2060. It's a huge challenge. China has a lot of, also the population is declining as well, aging. There are a variety of challenges facing. So it's not a linear curve, maybe, but we really have to find a way to do that. There could be synergy though. There's with such an advanced synergy of the high, anywhere it goes a few hours by speed train, and everybody has a smartphone, like a small ERP running its own work. Efficiency has greatly improved. The communication cost almost zero. So I would say that if we have a stable international environment, work with other well, we don't jeopardize that. And China probably is still going to keep largely with its synergy to grow for the next 5 years plan, and also next 35 China 2035 for the midterm range as well.
No, I mean, collaborative research, I think, is important for enhancing understanding and also progress. I mean, Harvard has had for, 25, 30 years, very good collaboration precisely around questions of air pollution, climate, and so forth, which has, progressed significantly over that period of time with colleagues through Tsinghua. And I do hope that those kinds of collaborations are able to continue. It also occurred to me, another thing as you were talking, Huiyao, our politicians tend to go to Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, for example, Guangzhou, maybe. If I only went to those cities, I would come back terrified about China's development. I mean, it's just staggering. But if I started going to rural Guangxi, I started going to rural Yunnan, I started maybe going to some of the mountains in Sichuan, I'd come back with a different perspective, I think, of China. Going back to what I talked about earlier, that China's domestic challenges are complex and are going to entail considerable attention from the Chinese leadership. And it's not that the whole of China is now full of glittering skyscrapers like Shanghai or Shenzhen. And I think it would help foreigners get a more sophisticated and perhaps more all-round perspective of what China has done and the challenges that still face China moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think that absolutely we need more international academic exchanges. We need more international student exchanges. And we need more, veteran China hand like you to conduct more or guide more studies in China. I mean, I was also quite disappointed with the recent, particularly last few years. It seems there's a phrase of the exchanges on the academics, and also the number of American students in China is dropping, and also the tourism to China is dropping too. I mean, even not to the level of the Beijing Olympic 12 years ago. So I really hope now with China infrastructure and all the accommodation hotels and all the things that we should really make it more friendly for our international visitors and also international academic student exchanges. Absolutely. I mean, anybody who come to China and will see China in a different China and complete China, they will have a better view on China rather than they are not coming. So it's so important that we maintain this dialogue and maintain this openness. And I hope that in university program, we should keep it open. We should keep the visa also a 10-year multiple entry visa for both countries, and we should let people come back and free. So how we can really get this pandemic freezing situation relaxed soon would be great. I'm glad to hear that by August 1st, U.S. universities now are starting to accept international students to come in. And I hope the same thing will be happening to China as well. I really hope so.
Yeah, still on the diplomacy relationship between the two countries, we noticed that a very interesting change might happen. It has been reported by Wall Street Journal that Professor Burns at Harvard Kennedy School might be appointed as the new U.S. ambassador to China. Ambassador Burns is well known for being a tough negotiator and also a strong advocate of China's separation by actively calling for alliance with countries like Japan, Australia, European Union, you can name those countries. So he would be very different from the previous ambassadors to China in terms of like background and expertise. So the question is, if Professor Burns is officially appointed, what kind of impact will it have on the diplomatic relations of the two countries?
Yeah, of course, I have no idea whether he will be appointed, so I can't speak from that perspective. I think one of the things you have to remember about Nick is that he is a long-term career diplomat. When he came to the Kennedy School, I think he was the highest ranking person within the State Department who was not a political employee. So that means he's well gifted in the craft of diplomacy. He knows how to approach, he knows how to argue. When you're an ambassador, though, you're not going to behave differently than your government is telling you to behave. Now, you might try and sort of get more realistic messages back to that government. So Nick Burns is not going to behave in a way which is out of step with the Biden administration. I do know, though, Nick has a strong experience of working with China on certain issues around Iran, and also on the question of the Korean Peninsula in the six-party talks. And he's often commented in those six-party talks that China actually played a very constructive role. So I don't think it shuts out the possibility for kind of creative dialogues. But, you know, he knows the diplomatic scene well. He knows many of those other countries in Asia, as well as China. I'm sure he's going to draw on those connections to promote what the Biden administration sees as being in the best interests of the United States. So I wouldn't see that him being appointed as ambassador, should he be so, will lead to any significant difference from where the Biden administration has taken its approach, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I do see President Biden actually appoint a lot of more competent and professional, seasoned staff. I mean, also he's really emphasized a lot of balance, a lot of gender equality, and also he's speaking experienced, diplomats or ex-officials. But come to the Nick cases, Nick Burns case, I think that if he has worked in the government, worked in Harvard is top university in the world and has a long tradition of also exchanges with China, has many Chinese students, scholar there. So he probably is well aware of all those issues and the challenges, opportunities. Well, let's hope that this is not rumor, but definitely, I'm sure we need a strong, capable U.S. ambassador to really protect some right channels and the bridges and the communication back to the U.S. And then we hope that Sino-U.S. relation can be stabilized.
Yeah, I think what Huiyao said at the end there is most important. What you want from your ambassador is someone who can pick up the phone and talk to the president if there is an important issue or if there's information to be fed back. Now, I don't know whether Mr. Burns has that capability, but I do know he has worked closely with President Biden's foreign think tanks and group thinking about foreign policy. So he clearly has a deep connectivity to those who are now working in the administration on East Asian affairs, for example. But as I said at the beginning, I have zero idea about whether he will or will not be appointed. But I just want to reemphasize the point I made that whoever gets there, you want someone who can pick up the phone and talk to the president directly.
Yeah, thank you both. Yeah, as a student in Professor Burns' class, I do respect him and his expertise. I wish him great success if got appointed. And I really hope he can bring his diplomatic wisdom to China and restore the US-China relationship.